Hello and welcome to Dixon Cox, where we go through the week's news in a fairly light-hearted fashion with me, Nick Dixon, and of course Paul Cox from GB News and other stuff. How you doing, Paul?
I'm good, thank you, Nick. I'm okay. The sun is shining.
Weather is
That
sweet, yeah.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, I was just trying to think of other things
Make you
that
want to
might.
move those dancing feet.
Yeah, exactly. I've got some slippers on actually, in the old moccasin style. So if anyone's wondering what's going on underneath the desk here,
We
it's the
just
1980s.
we just turned into a centrist dad podcast there. I referenced a 90 Finley Quay song from the 90s. You said you were wearing moccasin slippers. That was probably our most cringe opening ever.
Yeah.
But if you want more of that kind of content, go to nickdixon.net for the full episode. And we also do a whole extra podcast that is changing lives, changing people's lives. We talk about existential questions and much bigger themes that are beyond the scope of politics. And everyone's blooming loving it. It's called Dixon Cox Go
Aren't they
Mental. So people are
just?
loving that. You what?
I said, aren't they just? I just read the comments. Just went back this afternoon to have a look at the comments because there'd been some more since I last looked, and yeah, they're really engaging, and people sharing stuff, and some of them even giving us advice. I mean, obviously that's a ridiculous thing to try and attempt, but we appreciate it all the same.
Yeah, someone said, I think you've created something very special with this podcast. How about that? Just did it by accident. So easy. So easy for me, Paul.
Just
But and you're involved.
as my name's in it, and yeah, and I talk about my failing midlife years. So
Yeah, we get a lot more personal on that. So if you want the personal stuff, nickdixon.net and on all my interviews and so on. I do have an interview coming up this very week, so they're coming back as well. Got my articles, nickdixon.net. Paul's got a Substack as well. What's your Substack, Paul?
Paul Cox comedy?
Of course it is. Paul Cox Comedy. Solid, straight down the line.
That's
Always the
all I've
same.
got. Everything's the same.
Everything's the same.
Loads
Yeah.
of Paul Cox and some comedy.
Yeah, perfect. All right. So that's for the full episodes. But if you just want the free one, don't worry. We're going to give you loads of value today, like we always do. People will be clicking now. Podcast starts at 3:21. Yes, we didn't start the podcast immediately. We're starting it now. Don't worry. And we're going to talk again about the Farage reform situation because there's been many developments. We're also going to do maybe a little bit on Kemi Badenoch's boring speech, a little bit about Labour, who are slashing NHS England and have turned into the Tories, or at least maybe Tony Blair is back on the scene, some say. We might talk about Shakespeare, how he's apparently white supremacist now and a sign of British cultural superiority, and some other mad stories in peak woke. But let's crack on and do this blooming Farage story then. It's just still rolling. And he actually said to Choppers, aka Christopher Hope of GB News, he goes, well, let's see about the investigation. Maybe, I was angry last week. It was very conciliatory and it almost suggested he could come back. But then in other interviews, he still attacked him. And Julia Hartley Brewer said, we know he's not coming back. So it seemed to be that was just that one moment. In another interview or sort of interview situation, he was surrounded by journalists and they were asking only about Rupert Lowe. And he said, he's thinking about legal action. What do you think of that? He's like, yeah, I'll look forward to it. The next one said, so Rupert Lowe, blah, blah. He went, oh, and like faked a yawn. And then the next one said, on Rupert Lowe, and he just walked away. So he was just getting mugged by Lowe fans. Well, just reporters wanted to ask about Lowe. And he was just so sick of it. And maybe we'll get on to Zia Yusuf after that because he made some interesting comments about him, the quite controversial for Reform fans. What do you think of the Lowe situation, though, Paul? Is that any real development, or is it just still just never going to be fixed?
Well, nothing's changed since last week, other than we're now starting to see the tempers simmer a little, and it's just becoming more and more stark that that problem has existed longer than perhaps we'd all realised. I still say there's no route back for Rupert Lowe into the Reform Party. I mean, they're reported into the police. There seems to be some accusations that he behaved entirely inappropriately, and which he denies entirely. And one thing we're starting to see is this divide within Reform supporters, the Farage supporters and the Lowe supporters. And one thing Farage keeps saying is it's not a big story outside of Westminster. And we touched on this a little bit last week, and he's right. There was a poll last week that asked, do you know who Rupert Lowe is? And, a large proportion of those people said no. In terms of, his weight within British politics, they don't know who he is. They do know who the Reform Party is, and they do associate it directly with Nigel Farage. So I don't see this actually being anything other than a distraction. Of course, for those close to it and for those that are keenly interested to see Reform be better, do better, and become something, it's very disappointing still. That hasn't changed at all. How it pans out. I mean, what we're going to have now is a number of investigations. We've got a KC, a King's Council, undertaking an independent review of this on behalf of Farage and the Reform Party. That'll probably be quite quick, but will still take, I don't know, at least a month, I would have thought. Then there's the Parliamentary Committee, which will take forever. So if that does in some way contradict the KC's review, we won't know for months and months and months. And in the meantime, Rupert Lowe's just going to be on the periphery, Nick. So we haven't learned a great deal, but what we do know is this isn't going to repair itself. I don't believe, anyway, it's going to repair itself anytime soon.
Yeah, and as you say, Farage has very much been going with the line that this is quite minor. Someone, Julie Hartley-Brewer says, has Trump talked to you about this? He's like, no. He said he hasn't talked to Trump, but if he did, it wouldn't be about this. And he says that you're all in the media, but it's actually quite fringe stuff. I think it's bigger than that because it's about the heart of the right in British politics and just the people and just British politics in general. It's pretty important. The personal clash is one aspect, but the ideological clash is much more important for the country because it's all about whether you really think we can tackle immigration or whether you're prepared to just kind of bumble along with the status quo, pretending to do something. And Matt Goodwin has come out very strongly in favour of Farage. He's very involved with Farage and Reform. And he's come out very strongly on that side, mocking the so-called online right and saying that their positions are extreme. And yet we've seen polls that say remigration is supported by 66% of British people and 99% of Reform voters. That's from memory, but I think I'm right. So it's not an extreme policy. Although there are shifting definitions. Do you mean foreign criminals? Do you mean illegals, migrants? Do you mean people who have dual British citizenship or something like that? So it's a little bit ambiguous and it gets changed a lot what people mean. But the actual ideas Rupert Lowe's talking about, like for a start, all foreign criminals should go, that's completely reasonable. And it's completely agreed with by the British public, but it gets sold as something extreme. I think it tends to be about the language more than anything else. Farage seems very concerned about language. He actually confirmed he did change some language in Rupert Lowe's speech. They had a slight disagreement about what the language was. Was it the word remigration? Was it the term mass deportations? Farage said the language was dark, which seemed like a kind of lefty concern to me. Like, oh, the language is dark. It's the kind of thing people say to Suella Braverman. But actually, the actual policy seems to be largely agreed upon by the people, maybe not by Farage. You start to realise what you're going to get is the Tories, isn't it? It's going to be the Tories, whether it's the Tories that's actually reform because the Tory brand is destroyed, so it's reform and some Tories come over to it, or whether it's called the Tories and Farage goes over there, which seems less likely. You're basically getting a Tory party is what I start to realise more and more. Farage gets more and more moderate, gets rid of anyone like Rupert Lowe. We've seen today Nadine Dorries come out and attack Rupert Lowe, another Tory just instinctively attacking Rupert Lowe and sided with Nigel Farage. Quite odd for the ostensible opposition when you think about it. But of course, a lot of the Tories are behaving as if they're now in reform. Some of them are not, like Kemi Badenoch. Some of them are saying, no, we can't have Farage. Half of them are behaving like they're already in reform. Nadine Dorries said Rupert Lowe is unable to deliver even the shortest speeches without notes, which I thought was pretty funny for anyone who's seen Nadine Dorries attempt to read autocue on Talk TV. What an absolute car crash that was. She also says he's not a natural high flyer. She says, a natural high flyer, he ain't. I mean, he's got a net worth of around 30 million. Elon Musk's favourite politician built a massive following already. You wouldn't say he's a low flyer, would you? I mean...
No, I think there seems to be a lot of focus on his inexperience when it comes to politics, national level politics, based on the fact that he's only been in it since last July. So I guess that accusation will stick to some degree. There's so much you said there, like the online right thing. That's a phrase that's come into our parlance in the last week or two, and I'm not engaging with it too much at the moment. I think it's a way for some people to describe a section of right-wing supporters, particularly of reform, in a negative way, and they may or may not have a point. I don't like to silo like that. I don't like to go, well, that group of people, because they share this view, are bad because that's exactly what happened with Southport, and that's exactly what happened with a bunch of other things. We can't keep just scooping people up and say these people are bad. They might share opinions that are distasteful. They might share opinions that are hard to hear when we're so used to hearing parliamentary language. And that brings me on to my next point, is the difference with the difference between Farage and Rupert Lowe at the moment is Farage is now starting to represent the establishment. He's starting to ingratiate himself and immerse himself within the establishment of British politics and is behaving as such. And perhaps that's exactly what he needs to do in order to become Prime Minister one day. We'll leave that as an open question for our audience to answer. However, what Rupert Lowe does is he represents, in my opinion, he represents the foot soldiers for reform, the people that are starting to, for reform and its separate guises under Farage have been around for some time. This is not brand new. To some people, it feels brand new because of what's happened since July. However, what Rupert Lowe does is he represents a lot of people on the right, a lot of working class people. He says the right things. He tweets the right things. He asks a lot of questions in Parliament that other people wouldn't ask. And he's an outlier in that sense. Farage isn't doing that anymore. I'm not saying that Farage is not an outlier when compared to the rest of Parliament. But in terms of reform, Rupert Lowe is, and Nigel Farage is more establishment. So the deportations thing is really interesting because this is where the battle line's being drawn. Rupert is saying some pretty hard-line things about deportations, which could include sending back people that were born in the UK. Nigel Farage is drawing the battle line there and saying, absolutely not. That's wrong. In Nigel Farage's opinion, to send anybody back that was actually born in the UK is wrong. Now, on the face of it, it's difficult to disagree with that because, can you legally just be sending people back that were born in the UK? However, we have to look at the wider picture and we have to look at the history of and where we've got ourselves to. There is an institutionalized, imported issue within the UK and across Western Europe where community groups have come to the UK for the purpose of this debate and they've not assimilated, they've not integrated, and they're part of the problem that reform are trying to fix. So what Rupert Lowe is saying, we might have to look at this in a wider context and say, there are great swathes of people that if they don't fit in or don't help or don't contribute, may be considered for deportation. Now, it's quite stark to hear something like that. We're just not used to hearing rhetoric like that. And it's very easy to associate rhetoric like that with some dark old days on the right over the last century. So it's a very easy accusation to make. I think we just need to step back a little bit from both sides. I don't think anything should be dismissed, and I don't think absolutely everything should be included. I think it'd be good just to step back and think, right, what are reform trying to achieve here? Because it feels, let's say Rupert Lowe hadn't been suspended, it does feel like it's splintered in some way. And whatever side you're on this, each party has a leader. And each party has a manifesto and each party has a mission statement. And the whole point of being a party is you stand in behind that. Now, that opens up a whole other can of worms because what does reform stand for? I don't know, Nick. It's not entirely clear at the moment. And we've been saying this for a long time. So, what do you make of that, mate?
Yeah, there's loads there. On the deportations, there's also the element, the aspect of these rape gangs, which are such an extreme thing. As we've talked about, we've had a whole episode or two on it. The industrialized rape and torture, horrific torture of children for years and years, and in many, many towns, thousands of girls. That's an atrocity on such a large scale, you can barely get your head around it. So extreme measures would be needed when you're dealing with an extreme historical atrocity like that. And I say historical to give an idea of the scale, not to say it's not going on, because it still is. But Rupert Lowe, on the 18th of March, tweeted, "More lies being pumped out around my position on rape gangs. Let me clarify again. If a foreign national family member knew that their husband or brother was raping young white girls repeatedly and failed to act, then yes, they should be deported. I make no apologies for saying that. If that means thousands go, that means thousands go." Yeah, I struggle to have when someone raped these girls or knew about it and let it happen, I have zero sympathy for any of those people. There should be no concessions for them. And if they are essentially therefore foreign criminals, which they are, now so in the case of British nationals, he says prosecution for British nationals, deportation for foreign nationals. So yeah, well, fine. Citizenship stripped for dual nationals, followed by deportation. Yes, yes, and yes, to quote Alan Partridge. What's wrong with that? Prosecution for British nationals, obviously, ideally death penalty. We don't have it, so life imprisonment. Deportation for foreign nationals. Yeah, because they're criminals. Why do you want people in your country who are criminals? Why are you bringing in criminals? We are starting to deport them now from prisons in some cases, but they should all go. And then citizenship stripped for dual nationals. I suppose that's the more controversial one, but not really to me. But yeah, maybe that's where it gets controversial. There are some nuances where people go, "What if someone's been here for years and years? They're not a criminal and all this." People are always talking about different things on this deportation issue. That's the problem.
Yeah.
When Rupert Lowe is talking about rape gangs, it's very hard to have any sympathy for any of
So
it.
that's why I say there's a requirement to step back a little bit. I think there's also a requirement to have voices like Rupert Lowe in British politics, by the way. I mean, we spent an hour last week essentially leaning towards, well, I was, you were already firmly on the Rupert Lowe side of the debate. And I was leaning towards Rupert Lowe. And there was some criticism for that because Farage has got some real staunch supporters and for good reason. I mean, he's been doing this for some time now. And, if it wasn't for him, there wouldn't be Brexit. And a lot of people are very supportive of him on that basis. And they believe in a lot of what he's trying to do and a lot of what he's trying to say. But as we've discussed, probably since about September last year, Nigel Farage is going to have to walk a tightrope to make reform a mainstream party, which is kind of what the fear is. But what I mean by that is he's going to have to walk a tightrope to make them a successful party at national level with a considerable number of seats. At least I believe that's what he's being advised, and that's what history would tell us. It doesn't mean he can't do it. Like we've discussed before, we've made the comparison with Donald Trump. Donald Trump hasn't conceded anything. Donald Trump has just done what Donald Trump wants to do, and he's pushed it forward, and he's won successfully twice on that basis. I think that would probably be the sort of argument that Rupert Lowe would make, but Nigel Farage is maybe looking at this and saying British politics is different. So we've been discussing for a little while what a reform going to do, and Nigel is trying to tread this tightrope. And he's not going to be the Tories. The Tories, to me, describes a brand of the Conservative. Yeah, he's going to become Conservative. The Tories are this kind of almost defunct brand now, which has been entirely ruined by the previous 14 years they were in government, and so many things that we are concerned about now. So many things they introduced, triggered, enabled, all of those things. So I don't think they become the Tories, but I do think he's trying to become the next Conservative Party in the UK under the banner of reform. And it's very tricky. Rupert's that breath of fresh air when it comes to the rape gang question in Parliament. How aghast was that? I forget her name, the female MP for Rochdale, of all places.
Sarah Champion.
Yeah, at his language. And you're like, this is your patch. These young girls are being raped and murdered in some cases. This is your patch. Who cares if the language is not as you
Sarah
like?
Champion is Rotherham, sorry, but she was the one who...
Sorry, that's her. Yeah.
The weird thing is she was the one who first raised it and had to step down at the time. And now she's worried about the language.
She's done some good things. I know she has, in bringing it to prominence as well. But this is it now, isn't it? We've got this kind of... Because of what's happened with Trump, we're expected to behave a certain way within the British Parliament. And because of what's happened with Trump, people are looking at it going, no, we need to shake this up a little bit. Things can be done differently. And I think people are caught in two worlds. We've never seen that big shift in this country.
No, and we have a very different system as well. But on the sort of question of where are they going, and we'll get on to the Zia Yusuf question in a minute and the stuff about racism, but this 29 councillors defecting to reform. So last time we spoke, a single Lib Dem had moved across, but now 29 of them, and some of them are quite questionable. And in terms of this identity thing, so if they're coming from Labour and Lib Dem, you go, well, why are they able to just slip straight into reform? You can't have Rupert Lowe. He's beyond the pale. But Manzoor Hassan isn't, who's a guy who seems to be incredibly patriotic about Bangladesh. So people are just finding all these quotes from him. And it should be quite shocking stuff for... reform. Is this what people are voting for? And there's all sorts of memes and parodies of the people that are moving across. But yeah, this guy, he's been in the country 15 years, born in Bangladesh, everything, and he seems to be really just big on Bangladeshi patriotism. We don't know anything else about him apart from that. Maybe someone does. That was quite a surprising one. But just in general, all these people coming across from unsuitable parties, and Farage was very chuffed about this. he seems to welcome anything from the left of reform and want nothing to do with anything from the right of reform. Discuss.
Yeah. So yeah, that Bangladeshi. I mean, I like rice, like the next man, but I'm not. For the purpose of this discussion, I'm not particularly interested in what's going on in Bangladesh.
That's shocking. I like rice. Last time I heard something like that was about 20 years ago. A lad I knew said, "I'm not racist. I drink lilt." That's the
No,
worst.
right. So just for context, I'm not going to say I do have a friend that's Bangladeshi. They grow a lot of rice. It's famous for growing rice in Bangladesh. They grow it on very wet fields, and we owe a lot of our rice consumption to Bangladesh. Was my point.
I see.
And then I followed that by saying I can't be racist against Bangladesh because one of my friends is from Bangladesh, but obviously you can be.
And you are. That's the crazy thing about that friendship. You hate Bangladesh, yet maintain the friendship.
Yeah, it's incredible. And he knows I'm on GB News, and he doesn't like that either. But there you go.
Oh, well, that's a problem. Someone actually came up to me the other day, yesterday, in fact, liking GB News again. It keeps happening more and more in the supermarket, so I think we're growing. But you're always that tense moment where you think, "Am I going to get egged?" But then they're actually just nice, even in lefty North London. But go on, Paul. What about the 29 defections?
Yes, let's get back to the point. Save my bacon. Which is something else I don't like. But
that's true. All rice for them, no bacon.
Yeah, bloody hell.
And there you are with your pig in the background, people's gammon, just a walking insult to our multicultural world. Anyway.
So it's interesting, right? So the local elections across the whole of the country, there are about 1,600 seats to fight for in local elections. And I think Reform are going to fight on about 1,500 of them because they're not going to fight in the city of London, and they're not going to fight. I think he said in the Isles of Sicily. Isles of Scilly.
Silly. I doubt they'll do Sicily.
No, they're not doing Sicily.
It's not like Godfather.
The mafia aren't interested. Isles of Scilly, sorry. So that leaves that takes about 100 away, and there's going to leave about 1,500 seats. Well, of course, that's an incredible task. So the problem he's got is he's got to try and find candidates, and 29 people defecting is great. So the Tories are arguing that most of the ones that have defected from them, they were kicking out anyway. I don't know how true that is, but I think it's worth saying for balance. Not that we care too much for balance, but it's the vet. I would worry about the vetting process. This is the problem Reform are going to have when you go from flash to bang this quickly. You are going to have characters in there like Mr. Bangladesh, who perhaps goes against what a lot of the supporters might be interested in. But I'll tell you what, let's hear what they have to say. By Nigel's own admission, he said, I'd never met any of these people before. And then he introduces them in, and he stands at the lectern and they all come and sit back, and there's just an array of portly people sort of walking behind them and have done the most walking that they've done all week along the row of seats. So we don't know too much about those 29 candidates whatsoever. I shouldn't be taking the piss out of fat people. Who the hell am I to do that? But yeah, hey, lose a couple of stone and you flip sides. Yeah, so, sorry, fat people. I'm still one of you. Obviously, look at me. But yeah, it's very interesting. He's got to fill those candidates up very, very quickly. He had this problem in the general election. There was a vetting process then that wasn't particularly good. I hope it's improved since.
Which he blamed Ben Habib for in an interview with Julia Hartley-Brewer, and then Habib
he did
shot
indeed
back and said he was nothing to do with it. Weird one.
The Ben Habib Nigel Farage thing is really ugly. If I was Nigel Farage, I wouldn't even be commenting. I'd say, look, I'm not here to talk about Ben Habib. Move on. And people at first would go, oh, he's just evading the question. Yeah, of course he is. He's got business to do. Now, I'm not suggesting that there isn't beef to be had, but what I don't understand, there seems to be a naivete when it comes to Nigel Farage, particularly when it comes to Ben Habib, because why does he keep having the discussion? They don't get on. They've fallen out. Ben can just sit on the sidelines having a dig, and he rises to the bait every single time. So I'm slightly confused by that. I don't think he needs to be, from his perspective, I don't think he needs to be doing that.
Yeah, good point.
So it'd be interesting to see what happens. They need to build up a huge, cohort of candidates, 1,500 people to run for Reform. And as we've said before, this is where Reform are going to cut their teeth as politicians, as a political party as well. They're going to win local election seats. There is a Reform wave. and they will win a substantial amount of local election seats. Of that, I'm sure. And it's how well they do as councillors that's going to determine, I think, how many seats they might win at the next general election. That, alongside how well Nigel Farage runs the parliamentary party, because they're the only two measures. When you look at Labour, there's this huge history. When you look at Conservatives, there's even bigger history. And then if you're on the left of Labour and you don't like Labour, you go to Lib Dems, and maybe if you're even worse than that and slightly mentally ill, you go to the Greens. When you've kind of had enough of Tories, until very recently, there was nowhere for you to go. You just stayed with the Tories and hoped for the best. Now there's reform, so there's potential for a seismic shift on the right of politics that obviously Nigel Farage can take advantage of. So I think they cut their teeth at local councils. It's how they show that they can lead and govern, and it's how they get to a decent amount of seats at the next election, Nick.
Yes, but if it's full of Lib Dems and Labour and Bangladeshi,
well, they've got to be on board, haven't they?
Yeah, but yeah, as I said though in the last episode, the Reform are like the old Lib Dems anyway, so they will fit in. That's the tragedy; they will fit in quite well if they're Lib Dems. But as Farage is boasting about these defections, we also have the chairman of various branches resigning. So Maria Botel from Bridlington and the Wolds. You've got another one here from Richmond and North Allerton, long letter there. Dan Astley from Newcastle North. And there's a whole slew of these. Another one for Chester North. So, and what they all seem to cite is one or more of the same themes: treatment of Rupert Lowe, treatment by Zia Yusuf, general disorganization and chaos, and sort of betrayal. So, lots of people have gone over that. So, it has been a problem. It's been a bigger problem than he thought. Maybe not as big as it seems. Yeah, maybe he will get rid of Rupert and it will be forgotten about at the election. Maybe it hasn't impacted polls, which it doesn't seem to have that much. So, yeah, maybe Matt Goodwin will win the argument. Though even Douglas Murray was against Farage on this and was on Rupert Lowe's side and saying, why are you being so wet on the migration question. But yeah, these branch chairs resigned, but then they got all these defections. So who knows? At the grassroots level, they definitely seem to have alienated a lot of people.
Yeah, because like I say, Rupert Lowe, represents that what am I trying to say?
Grassroots. We should just say it like a northerner, Paul. You don't have to grass, and then you don't run into trouble.
Now. And the foot soldiers, as I described, that's what I was trying to think of previously, because he does he speaks in an unparliamentary way, as do all these other people, and he's speaking their language, and that goes a long way. It does go a long way, and we just don't know how unfairly Rupert Lowe's been treated, because we just don't know how accurate any of the accusations are. If as we said last week, if the accusations are entirely false, and even worse, fabricated in some way to target Rupert Lowe, then that's a massive issue. That's sort of an irreparable issue.
Yeah, and then the issue of Richard Tice saying it doesn't matter what the outcome is, which was just absolutely bizarre.
Well, it does, because Nigel Farage needs to maintain integrity to lead the party, and the problem you've got with Nigel and Reform is that yes, the board can sack Nigel Farage, but Nigel Farage picks the board, so they're not going to, are they?
No,
that's not going to happen. So essentially, Rupert Lowe, Nigel Farage is not going to be able to get rid of.
No, and it's he and Yusuf are the directors of the company now, so it's all very... I'm getting almost bored of talking about the structure of Reform's company, but yeah, it's very much Farage and Zia Yusuf. So let's get on to Zia Yusuf. So Farage made the statement saying that there'd been racist abuse against Zia Yusuf, and no one in the media was treating it seriously. It was a kind of like, imagine if the roles were reversed cliche. So it was quite a strange claim. There's been all this racist abuse against Zia Yusuf, and maybe there has been some, and the media don't care, whereas they would if it was Diane Abbott. It's quite a strange point to focus on. So I just wrote, and this has 9.5 thousand likes, so I'll probably be sacked soon, but I wrote, tired of being called racist by a progressive political elite. Now you can be called racist by the new populist uprising. Quoted on Lotus Eaters. Thanks, lads. So, an absolute banger. The point is, we've had this set of tactics for a long time. We're sick of being called racist. Like, I criticised Zia Yusuf, but it wasn't in a racist way. I just said he seems to be the problem, and why has he got so much power? And many people are saying the same thing. Now, there will be some, of course, where it goes over the line, though many have pointed out Islam's not a race. So if they have concerns about his attitude towards Islam and why Farage has softened his attitude so much, is that because of Zia Yusuf? That wouldn't be racial. Of course, it would be about a religion that is often also a political ideology. So that wouldn't be racism. But very strange for Farage. It was very similar to how the campaign against Rupert Lowe seemed like cancel culture. It seemed like, oh, he was bullying, and it seemed to be tapping into victim culture. It seemed to be stitching a guy up in a very cancel culture way. It's like we're not supposed to engage in those tactics, or especially when it comes to like, oh, he was bullying. It's like, what do you think Churchill did? Do you think Churchill spoke nicely to all his secretaries? It's like, and Rupert Lowe, it turned out not to even be to do with Rupert Lowe. It was just in his offices, and it was about some people who seemed like they already had a beef. So anyway, but this idea of it was very woke and wet as a statement, and now going on and calling everyone racist, such a strange move, and that's why I put that tweet up. It's like it's not that Zia Yusuf probably hasn't had some abuse that crosses line. I'm sure he has, but it's like, really, now you're going to turn on the members and the party and the voters and say, "Oh, you're being mean to Zia Yusuf." Well, who is Zia Yusuf? He's come in, seems to have completely changed the party, and of course, people are going to have their say on that. What do you think, Paul?
Yeah, I found that really interesting, if not a little strange, because on the face of it, it looks as if he's asking the media to criticise his voters for the way they spoke about his party chairman.
Yeah,
now,
exactly.
Why would you want to encourage that? I mean, you've got a whole communication network where you can cascade that communique down saying, this isn't on. We've seen a lot of this. We're not happy with it. We keep it internal. That might get leaked, but that wouldn't be the end of the world. To stand up and read straight from what we would probably refer to as the woke textbook, playbook for commenting on these things seems strange to me. That's the right word. It does seem strange to me, because he's going, well, yeah, look, you know, all of our supporters are racist, and I can't believe the media aren't picking up on it, except one guy in the Times, and thank you for that. I don't normally agree with you, but thank you
Danny
for that.
Finkelstein, yeah.
Daniel Finkelstein, yeah. So I find that a little bit turning the gun on yourself. So I find that really interesting. Because why were, you know, it won't stick. It won't be a massive problem, but it also won't be forgotten either. Now, I'm not sure what the comments were, so I could stand corrected here. I'm not suggesting that if there was, I haven't seen anything myself that I would be concerned about. I've seen a lot of debate about the division between, you know, the side of Rupert and the side of Farage, but I haven't seen, and I guess I have seen some rather just sort of innuendo-y type, distasteful type, why Zia Yusuf in the Reform Party type comments to some degree, but I think it's largely, you know, maybe I'm giving the benefit of the doubt, which, by the way, is what I stand for with regards to being a free speech advocate, is allowing those voices to be heard. So I'm not going to apologise for giving people the benefit of the doubt, but the reason I would do in this particular case is that they have every right to question, don't they? There's been a bit of an about turn with regards to some of Farage's policies since Zia Yusuf has been at the head of the party. That could be entirely a coincidence. As we've said, both of ourselves, he's a slick, smooth operator. I can see why a man, he's only in his 36, 37, something like that, isn't he?
38, I think.
He's a young man, and he operates very well. I can see why Nigel would have him at the top of the party. There are some question marks there. Of course there are. But we don't know the answers. And I wouldn't be too quick to blame him, because I just don't know if that would stand up to scrutiny in the long term or not. But I do find it fascinating that he would come out and say, "I can't believe more of the media aren't upset by our supporters being racist." That's quite an incredible thing to say.
That is correct. How you've hit on that. It's a very good point. And what I say to that is, so there's some talk in the online right, to use the term that Matt Goodman's not happy with.
I mean, you're the cheerleader for the online right?
Well, I am part of it. I mean, probably. I mean, Spiked had a pop at them as well, calling them dim. I thought, who's dim? Is Carl Benjamin dim? Is Nima Parvini dim? He's, whatever you think to Nima, he's incredibly smart. Connor Thomason, is he dim? Again, even if you don't like him, extremely high IQ people. So, and even David Frost had a go at them as well, which I'm hopefully going to talk to him about on the podcast. But this, so to quote the online writer quite keen on quoting Carl Schmitt, controversial bloke in his lifetime, joined the controversial German party, but as a theorist, he was very astute. And one thing he noted was the friend-enemy distinction in politics, and he was talking about the hard-nosed reality of how power works. You reward your friends, you punish your enemies. And we so often see this bizarrely reversed on the right in our politics. You see the right constantly reward their enemies. They cancel their friends. They cancel the people. A good example would be Roger Scruton, the late Sir Roger Scruton, who was cancelled by Johnny Mercer. And what's that rubbish? What's that fairly nondescript guy with the French wife who was in the Tom Tugendhat? And then one other whose name I always forget.
I would never have guessed that, by the way, by that. I would never have guessed that.
Tom Tugendhat's the only one that apologised. Johnny Mercer never did. And the other guy who was so insignificant, I always forget his name, but 3 Tories threw Sir Roger Scruton under the bus. One of the foremost conservative thinkers, at the time, he was probably the foremost British conservative thinker alive. Anyway, so you go, why do you constantly punish your enemy? But then you move to the next thought. Oh, these are Farage's enemies. So Farage, he's been very clear, as has Richard Tice when he talks about that lot and so on, and Farage in various interviews, constantly condemning the right, but constantly cozying up to anyone to the left of reform. So you go, oh, their enemies are the right, and their friends are the left, and that fits with my theory that Reform are a liberal party. They're like the old Lib Dems. They're not a right-wing party. Never have been. And then you just look at it very clearly. You go, oh yeah, the enemies of Reform is anyone on the right, and like Rupert Lowe included, by the way, and anyone who backs Rupert Lowe, and their friends are any Lib Dem who fancies coming across. Right? I mean, can you come to any other conclusion?
No, probably not. That's why it's fascinating to see the way this has played out, and maybe it's good that it's playing out now. It's all about, to quote Ian Dowie, which is a really old reference from football. It's all about bounce back ability. How are every week try and call it the Farage party? But just poor attempt at trying to mash 2 words together. How are the Reform Party going to bounce back from this? Now, Nigel, I think quite rightly, argues that it's not a big thing outside of Westminster. It's not a big thing outside of the right wing / political commentariat, but it could be. And it is very disappointing for a lot of people at the way Rupert Lowe has been treated. And he's not going to be coming back in. So it is all about how they come back from this and how they move forward. It quickly goes under the carpet if there's a big win in the local elections for local councils. It quickly goes under the carpet if the polls keep going up and Reform look like they're ahead of Labour still. But they still need to produce a manifesto which tells us what they stand for. Now, we know some of the key policy issues of what they stand for, but some of that's been brought into question as a result of this debate, because we're not entirely sure what Farage wants in terms of immigration and deportation. We know what Rupert Lowe comes out at least once a day and says, just to clarify, this is what I believe. We haven't actually had that from Nigel. We don't know quite what he believes, and he's playing his cards very close to his chest. And as this party grows, they're going to have this mission statement, which really tells the wider constituency, i.e. the UK, what it is that they stand for, so we know what we're voting for. And if like you say, Nick, they are just the new Liberal Party, as in, by which we mean, if there's any American viewers and listeners out there, we don't mean liberal in the same way you might do in terms of the Democrat Party, although Nick might do. I think we mean it in the traditional sense, in the same way that maybe Tony Blair was quite liberal, and it's kind of a centre-right view of the world. We're not going to be too harsh, but we might be a little bit. Is that right, Nick?
Well, not centre right. Reform, I'd say centre left. Yeah, you could say they're a bit like Blair. Yeah, something like that. They're a left party, is my claim. They're to the right on the economy, but that's really on the y-axis. So they're really to the bottom on the y-axis, and to the left on being very socially liberal. I mean, what are their
Okay,
socially conservative policies? Some vague stuff about immigration that Farage wants to constantly distance himself from, but immigration almost transcends left and right now anyway, because people like Denmark are suddenly tough on immigration. It's become such a problem that to talk about illegals, I'd say that's almost, I couldn't even say it's on the right really when you're talking about illegals. Yeah, okay, mad lefties want illegals to just stay and do whatever they want, but that's an extreme position. You could almost argue it's just a pragmatic position on illegal immigration, and that even reform, basically they've got a moderate immigration policy, they've got right wing economics or y-axis libertarian economics, and they're socially liberal. So whatever that combo is, so it's not in any way conservative, is it? They're not talking about no fault divorce or abortion. They're not talking about, well, Lee Anderson wants to bring back the death penalty, but no one else is saying that. They voted in favor of assisted dying. Some of them, then Rupert
worked
changed his
out.
mind. So you actually look socially liberal on most key issues. So you know, and then Gawain Towler had an interesting thing. He was former head of press at Reform UK. He had an interesting point that I was reminded of it with something you said there. That Farage is actually, yeah, we don't know what he thinks. The reason for that is he likes to sort of stay either just ahead or, in Towler's estimation, just behind the trend. I think he cited net zero. His idea was that Farage has always been just behind the crest of the wave, just coming in at the right, making like seeing which way the wind's going.
Yeah.
Basically, sorry to mix up my weather metaphors, and then just following along. And you can see it like that. There was also an interview with Catherine Blakelock, who's obviously not a Farage fan, having been, according to her, betrayed by him. And she said that he sort of resigns after every success, which was quite an interesting idea. Like he does well in an election, then resigns, or wins Brexit, then resigns, and you go,
like like Ronnie
"That's
Barker
interesting."
walking away at the top of comedy.
Yeah, it's a weird one, and you could get quite conspiracy theorists about it and say, actually, is that a name? I got her name wrong, maybe. But you could be quite conspiracy theorist about it and say, is Farage there, to contain the right? Of course, I couldn't say this because I'm on GB, he's my colleague. But if you wanted to, you could say, is he there to sort of contain the right? Stop that he kind of pops up every time there's a genuinely like radical uprising, and make sure it doesn't get too out of control, deals with it, then leaves. Catherine Blaylock, I was right, yeah.
Hmm.
So that's one argument. That's one argument on that. I don't know if you've got any more on that because we want to get on to the Dominic Cummings meeting. But anything else to add on that, Paul, before we do? Which is still Farage. It's Farage met Dominic Cummings. Should we go into that?
It's all Farage. Yeah, let's go on to that because there isn't too much. I won't be able to. I won't be able to top what you just said. Not that I ever try, Nick, but I think that's a nice little point to leave it
Okay.
at.
Well, so yeah, this was interesting. It came out in the Times. Tim Shipman, Cummings meets Farage to discuss remaking the state and how to replace the Tories. Now, Farage has been very clear that it wasn't about uniting the right, but it was about taking on the blob. I think it was in December they met, and a few things were discussed: how to take on the blob and not end up like Liz Truss and get sort of nobbled by the deep state. How they were talking about Doge cost cutting, Elon Musk Doge, and how they could mimic that. What they have to do to replace the Tories, how power works, which is interesting. How power really works, which is interesting because you worry that Farage has never really cared about getting things done. This suggests maybe he actually is looking at how it actually get things done, rather than just be all about slogans, which is at least encouraging. And about and they're not talking about working together. It's very clear on that. Cummings he wants to be sort of he's a bit of a loner at the moment. He's staying out of it. He stopped talking about the startup party, which is one idea he had, and he seems to now be talking about how reform can do it and seeing reform as a vehicle. I mean, I'm sure he'll get his heart broken like he did with Boris, but he's now finally accepting reform as a vehicle. He was saying vote for them in these local elections. Cummings apparently reached out to Farage to suggest a meeting, and that's particularly significant because they've gone on so badly in the past. Now, it may not be completely true, but in Brexit, the Uncivil War, that fictionalized account, Dominic Cummings calls Farage the C word. And it was kind of like those were the kind of terms they were on, but he suggested a meet up. Farage was open to it, and they did it because he's your man, Cummings, on one thing seems to be the best on is you're in power now. How do you actually get anything done in our arcane, ludicrous system where the civil service is against you? You're working on a Windows 98 computer in the rabbit warren of number 10. The prime minister's not sharing data on the economy with the chancellor and vice versa. Nothing works. There's endless discussions whether they should implement Microsoft Teams or a different program. Hundreds of thousands spent on which would be the most secure. Basically, he talks about the absolute inefficiency, the absolute patheticness of our system, and it just sounds absolutely nightmarish to get anything done. So it is encouraging now, even though I've said Reform have lost my vote for their treatment of Rupert Lowe. Looking at it in the bigger picture, let's say Farage did get in, you'd at least want him working with someone like Cummings to understand how to actually get things done, because that is one's feeling with Farage. He's brilliant on campaigning and communicating and having a laugh and getting a big rally going, but is he good on detail and getting things actually done? And by the way, many people have struggled. Obviously, the Tories being the primary example, 14 years doing F all. What do you think, Paul?
Well, first of all, Dominic Cummings is very good at choosing the conduit through which he will deliver his own personal politics, his own personal political ambitions. He did exactly that with Boris Johnson, and it's of no surprise to me that he might well look towards Nigel Farage to help deliver that even further. One thing we do know about him is once he's been crossed, once he's been jilted in some way, his whole energy is focused on what feels to me like revenge.
Yeah.
I mean,
delete those WhatsApps, Nigel.
Yeah, it would probably be a good idea. So, systematically destroyed Boris Johnson. Just systematically in the backgrounds, he was the puppet master, taking Boris Johnson down after the pandemic. Made sure that he did do that, ended his premiership. Arguably has ended Boris Johnson's political career. I think a lot of that's down to Dominic Cummings.
A lot of it's down to Boris, to be fair.
Yeah, well, absolutely. It's easy though, isn't it? Because I think to some degree, Boris owed his success to Dominic Cummings, so he knew how to dismantle that success.
Cummings giveth and he taketh away, is what you're saying.
Yeah, I believe so. I mean, yes, I do believe that wholeheartedly. So he is incredibly good at identifying how he might deliver his own personal political ambitions. And having a look around, it became more and more clear to Dominic Cummings and probably the rest of us that Nigel Farage is possibly now the new conduit in which to do that. And it's no surprise in politics that people that didn't get on previously under one policy fallout and now get on. They got a united enemy now, and that united enemy, by the way, that enemy is destroying the Tory party. That's what that's about. That's taking the task to the Tories and kicking them when they're down and ultimately destroying them for a generation. And there are plenty of people out there on left and right that would be more than happy to see Cummings and Farage do that dirty business, because the Tories have let a lot of people down. I mean, they're hated on the left anyway because they're the Tories. There are people grown up voting Labour that have no idea why they hate the Tories. They just know that they're hating the Tories. It's a synonym for wanker on the left. Never kissed a Tory. Bet you have. They just haven't told you. You haven't kissed anything, actually. I've had a look at you. But so from that perspective, it's no surprise, and I think it does Farage good. Why wouldn't you speak to Dominic Cummings? If anybody knows how to dismantle the mob or find the weak underbelly of the blob, it's Dominic Cummings, and essentially Farage needs to be able to do that. And he needs to be able to identify policies. This is what I was talking about. What do they stand for? Identify policies that really target that and can be vote winners as well. So the Brexit under the Conservatives, Boris Johnson, the way they fought for Brexit worked. Lots of people never saw that outcome. Lots of people. I don't just mean the London blob. I mean lots of people outside, people that voted Brexit, didn't really think that was going to happen. There were plenty of people who did, and I'm sure they're listening to this now thinking, I always thought it was going to happen, Paul, but there were plenty of people who didn't, and that happened largely because of that combination between Boris and Cummings. And I can see him being a real ally to Nigel Farage, and
Yeah,
we're
I would
starting
love.
to see. Go
Go
on.
on.
We're starting to see a real coalesce. We're starting to see them coalesce around Farage. Some people, like let's just take Matt Goodwin, a GB News colleague of ours, very quickly come out. He has nailed his colours to the Farage mast, as have a lot of people, because they are placing bets now on where they might be themselves, including Dominic Cummings and Matt, where they might be in 3 to 5 years' time. And they're going, the conduit through which we can achieve our own personal politics is Nigel Farage. And it's not Rupert Lowe. Rupert Lowe doesn't have he doesn't have the authority to deliver that. Nigel does. So it's no real surprise. Unlikely bedfellows, but like I say, this is Westminster. This is Westminster. So anything can happen, Nick.
I really wish I could hear that meeting with Cummings and Farage. Cummings were like, the prime minister's girlfriend was running everything. It was completely crackers, and they're all fuckwits. They've got the civil service, a bunch of fuckwits. It was just a matter of swearing. It had definitely said completely crackers at some point. It had definitely said fuckwit, probably fuck pigs. Sorry for the swearing, people that don't like this swearing on the podcast, but I'm merely quoting.
You're in character.
I'm in character quoting Dominic Cummings. Exactly. Yeah. But there were some really interesting other bits in the article raised, and this is why Farage keeps having to deny that Unite the Right was discussed, because Tim Shipman goes on to talk about the Unite the Right campaign, which will be explicitly agnostic about whether this means cooperation on shared policy areas such as immigration, a non-aggression pact so each party focuses on seats it can win, a formal electoral pact, or a full-blown merger or takeover of one party by the other. So they're saying they don't know what model it'll take exactly. I mean, I think the most likely model is Farage has the power, he has the leverage, and just says, Tory brand's done, it has to be reform, and you have to come over to me. It seems the most likely to me. But there's another interesting part here that they say they could mimic Germany with a CDU CSU thing, a combo, and it would be Tories in the south, reform in the north. I mean, that would be very interesting. I haven't seen that before.
Like a civil war.
Just a tactical.
That's what it felt like.
Yeah, but actually, just a tactical vote. I mean, it's gonna. We all know the left are going to have a tactical. Ed Davey, Lib Dems and Greens are essentially nothing, so they'll just tactically. Maybe the Greens might have some beef, but Lib Dems they'll all tactically vote to keep Labour in, and so Reform and Tories know they have to do that as well. Reform say there'll be no deal. The only reason the Tories are talking about it is because their poll ratings are about to fall off a cliff. So they're definitely asserting that they're in the power position, very Trump-like. You don't have the cards, basically, is what they're saying. But they're all talking about getting rid of Kemi. I mean, obviously, Cummings thinks that Kemi just messes around on her iPad, and there's this idea of a grid of attacks to make Kemi's life difficult after May. So I wouldn't fancy this grid of attacks. So where Farage and the Unite the Right people agree is that Badenoch is not the right leader to bring them together. One of those involved said political operators were already drawing up a media grid of attacks to make the Tory leader's life difficult after May, when the Conservatives are expected to hemorrhage hundreds of seats to reform. So there you go. So we'll get her out sharpish, one plotter said. More and more MPs realise she's doomed. A grid is coming together to bury her in disaster from the locals, keep the pressure on, then F up the conference. So there you go. Maybe we should get on to Kemi, because she did a speech that was fairly boring, and maybe we'll get onto that. I'm just looking at the time, thinking maybe we should get onto that after the paid section. Anything else you want to say? We'll get onto that in the paid section, as well as the Labour NHS England thing and Shakespeare being cancelled. Anything else you want to say though about this Unite the Right thing, Paul, and this Cummings business?
Well, from what I'm reading, this wasn't some big seminar that Cummings and Farage had. This was an opportunity to meet up. He took it. It looks like the invite came from Cummings to Farage rather than the other way around. And Farage, in an interview, I think with Julia Hartley Brewer today, said that he'll bury the hatchet with a lot of people. Most people who bury the hatchet with the opportunity would bury the hatchet with, which was interesting. See if he says that in a couple of years with Rupert Lowe. But we don't know how big this meeting was. We don't know if there's some agenda, or they just sat down at a pint and all the things that were said that you expertly suggested that might have been said, Nick. So politically, it's an interesting way of it's an interesting conversation. It's fascinating for us to discuss. But it's no big step forward in terms of Farage and Cummings are going to come together in some official capacity. In fact, I don't think they ever will do. But the fact that Cummings is willing to work with Farage is very interesting.
Yeah, I'm interested to see if they. I mean, I can't really see them doing reform in the north, but who knows? I mean, yeah, I guess in terms of standing down seats strategically, yeah, that could easily happen. And that's the most likely, isn't it? A sort of strategic alliance, standing down in certain seats and things. Let's see, let's see. But some say Jenrick could come back as leader. I think Chris Philp wants to be leader, but we'll get into all that behind the old paywall. NickDixon.net. But thank you very much to all the listeners on YouTube, or viewers on YouTube, listeners on the audio. Thank you very much. We'll be back again. Follow Paul at Paul Cox Comedy on everything and me on nickdixon.net, and we'll see you again next week.